Hello and welcome to Community Pulse, a PAN TV production featuring local leaders and organizations focused on health and well-being in the city of Chicago. Community Pulse is presented in partnership with Foxglove Alliance, a public health care coalition supported by the Hectone Institute of Medicine in partnership with HC3, the Healthcare Council of Chicago, as well as Hectone's Nurses in Humanities. My name is Meghan Philipp, and I serve as the Executive Director of HC3, the Healthcare Council of Chicago, and one of our rotating hosts on Community Pulse. Today's episode, I am so grateful to have a leader from the West Side Heroin and Opioid Task Force as we talk about Recovery Month. Recovery Month is a national observance held every September to educate Americans that substance abuse and mental health services can enable those with a mental and or substance abuse disorder to live healthy and rewarding lives. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my special guest, Reverend Fanya Burford-Berry. Welcome, Fanya.
Well, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well,
yes.
As I mentioned, we are celebrating and Recovery Month. So for our viewers that are not familiar with your efforts, can you provide an overview of the mission and the goals of the West Side Heroin and Opioid Task Force?
Yes. The West Side Heroin Opioid Task Force, our overall mission is to save lives and to reduce overdoses on the west side of Chicago by teaching Narcan and distributing Narcan throughout the west side. We receive heat maps or hotspot maps from the Chicago Department of Public Health, and those maps show us where overdoses have taken place or calls from the EMS where overdoses have taken place, and then we go into the neighborhood table and we teach the residents of that neighborhood Narcan and distribute Narcan in the neighborhood, and then we teach practices of harm reduction. We were convened in 2016 by LaShawn Ford, and we predominantly work on the west side of Chicago.
That's great. Mm-hmm. So Representative Ford is in our Illinois legislature, and he's such an advocate for this issue.
Yes.
So where are some of the specific communities that you have been focused on based on some of those heat maps, and how are you continuing to provide intervention there and support services?
Yes, we primarily focus on Austin, East and West Garfield Park, North Humboldt Park, and North Lawndale. We focus on those communities because that is where the city of Chicago has identified most overdoses are taking place. We have a nickname on the west side of Chicago being Heroin Highway because the easy access from downtown as well as from the suburbs to come and purchase drugs. And so that's the reason why we focus our efforts in that area. I am a resident of the Austin area, and so because of that, because I am a resident of the Austin area, I do see the seriousness of this issue, and that's the reason why I work so hard and diligently, and the team works so hard. All the team members that we have work live on the west side and work hard on this issue. So
that's great. And really recognizing that you guys are treating something that has already happened. So how can you explain for our viewers today a little bit more about what harm reduction looks like in practice and why it's so needed? Obviously, primary prevention is a part of the ecosystem and one of the things that we're always hoping to solve for. But with this piece, how can we, save lives when these things are happening? So let's talk a little bit about harm reduction and how you all are framing that in your communities.
Yes. Well, let's start first with harm reduction is. I mean, we always think of it sort of with the AIDS movement, with getting clean needles, as well as with clean equipment for if you are to use drugs. However, harm reduction is wearing a seatbelt, right? If you have a car accident, you have your seatbelt on, you have less harm when the accident happens. So these are just simple elements of harm reduction, as well as this is the hottest day of the year right now as we're filming in Chicago. Wearing sunscreen is harm reduction, right? And so that's how we explain it to the citizens of our community. Is like we do a lot of things to reduce harm to ourselves and to our families. And harm reduction in the world of people who use drugs means that we practice safe practices when it comes to using drugs. Use drugs with a friend. Have Narcan available. Don't be alone or isolated with this, because you cannot save your life. A friend can save your life. Someone else can save your life. So please practice safe usage, and that's what harm reduction is in the world with people who use drugs.
Yeah. So how also are you thinking about initiatives and strategies that help to meet the needs of the community? You know, you said that you have special areas and focuses. So are there specific initiatives through the task force or through partnership that you advance opportunity to connect with community members that might need these services?
Well, one thing about us is we don't wait until people come into our office building to get Narcan. We go out on the streets. We have 6 shifts, or not 6, but 3 shifts throughout the community. We have a morning, we have afternoon, and we have an evening shift sponsored by the Chicago Department of Public Health, as well as the Illinois Department of Substance Use and Prevention. And so we go out there, we are meeting the people where they are. So that is really the first strategy, is we are out in the community. We're not behind our desks doing the work. Then we stop everybody that we can come across. Hey, do you want to learn how to save a life? Or sometimes we're like, I know you. Hey, come on. And then we start engaging in the conversation regarding harm reduction, regarding Narcan. And then we have gotten lots of partners with us. We have Haymarket, we have Family Guidance, we have COIP, UIC, we have Fathers Who Care, we have a whole bunch of community partners who are out with us. And so we begin that initial conversation with, hey, you want to learn how to save a life? And then we teach them Narcan, and then we sort of ask more questions if they're interested, especially about their drug usage. And a lot of people are very honest with us about their drug usage. And then we're like, well, are you thinking about recovery? Do you think you would like to go into treatment? And our partners who are out there who can induct someone into medicated assistant recovery right away, such as UIC, such as Family Guidance, we hand them off warmly to our partners. You know, Sherry is on Family Guidance, and we're just like, hey, this person is interested in going into recovery. And so that is our strategy, is we kind of pull them in because we're people who live on the west side. Most of the people who see us say, hey, I think I know you live on my block, or I've seen you around, because the west side is very relational, right?
Yeah.
And so we can sort of pull them in and then hand them over to other people who do the medical work that goes on with recovery.
That's great.
Yes.
You know, and there is a lot with partnership involved, and there's a role to be played with the Chicago Police Department too. So how do you collaborate in a thoughtful way that isn't jarring, or you know, sometimes there's a stigma around police in sort of the drug use atmosphere, but we're really trying to shift that, especially under the new mayor's priorities of trauma reduction and trauma awareness. But as it relates to some of your efforts, how has that relationship been?
Yeah, well, everything is about relationships. So we go to the meetings where the police officers have meetings regarding community engagement. We know all the community engagement officers in all the districts that we service. And so like the 11th, the 10th, the 15th, the 25th, we are involved in their activities. You know, when they had National Night Out, we had a table there. We were giving Narcan out and talking to the community about harm reduction practices. So we are there at those meetings, and we share our schedule or where we're going to be, as well as there's other meetings that the police officers have. I'm being a pastor, I'm at the faith-based meetings, right? And we talk about harm reduction and how we can be more involved in there. So that is how we work with law enforcement. It is by creating relationships, knowing the people who are in the community, and saying, this is what we're doing, and then they get involved. We have a police officer who always asks us for Narcan, Officer Medina. He's like, I want Narcan, you know. And then there's Officer, my name is escaping me, but they're always asking, they're always interested, because they see the issue, they see the problem, and so they're willing to help.
That's really great.
Yes.
So, as you educate both, your community partners that you're working with to transfer them into behavioral health services or recovery, with police, there are a lot of components to this. So, what are some of the educational opportunities that the West Side Task Force has enacted, both in educating those stakeholders as well as those that are potentially on a path to recovery? You mentioned really having trusted relationships with the neighborhoods that you're in. So how do you facilitate that educational component, and what are some of the touch points or opportunities that you guys offer?
Yes, well, the first touch point is when we table, we teach the Narcan and we distribute it. And then when somebody wants to go deeper and understand addiction, people with substance use disorders, then we have Reverend Dr. Charles Brown, who does a wonderful presentation, virtually or in person, regarding why people choose drugs, right? And so we engage that conversation with them with Reverend Dr. Charles Brown. We do presentations for churches and houses of worship, and any kind of community group that wants to have the presentation, because people are curious. People want to understand why their loved ones, their sons and daughters, and why their parents are choosing drugs over having healthy lives, right? And so it is a chronic health issue. I'm in recovery for substance use. My drug of choice was alcohol, and it's a matter when you figure it out. Recovery helped me figure out why I chose it, right? There is so many things that in my past that was saying, you know what, you always have to occupy yourself, right? Boredom is not allowed. And so when the pandemic happened, there was boredom. And I'm like, I have to fill this up with something. So I filled it up with drinking. Then I am a person that wants to connect with people, and I love socializing. And then when the pandemic happened, there's no connection, there's no people, isolation. So I began to drink more, and I was depressed, and I was dealing with those mental health issues of depression, isolation. And then you have George Floyd happening at the same time. And so there's post-traumatic stress disorder in the community. And so once again, unhealthy habits I had learned growing up, like how do I treat my trauma? I treat my trauma with alcohol. And so that is how we are working together, working with community agencies, explaining why people choose drugs is because there's something going on, something missing, and that's what it fills it up. And then when you realize, oh, whenever I'm bored, I want to drink. Maybe I need to do something else, or learn to sit with the boredom, learn to sit with the pain, learn to sit with the joy, right? And so that is what recovery taught me, is about it's okay to sit with your emotions and notice it and just let it go. So,
Well, thank you for sharing your personal investment in this. How do you, I feel like, when people come to the table, how do you tailor intervention like that? When there are family members and loved ones that do have a stake in the game and want to, I always say this has to be self-selecting when you're on a path to recovery, because only you have the power to enforce that with yourself. And to your point with your story, you recognized where you were. But not everybody knows how to do that. So how do you support those opportunities for people? We started with, we're making sure, first of all, that people aren't harming themselves to a point of overdose. But, what are the other sort of integral pieces to sort of disrupt the habits of folks that are kind of going down this path?
It is loving, taking time, asking lots of questions, being curious about someone who has struggling with substance use disorders. It's trying to find that there's so many different pathways to recovery, and a lot of people don't know. A lot of people see the first entrance stuff as AA, right? And AA is a great program, but it wasn't for me. So when I was able to seek treatment, I started to research ways. I'm like, this is the recovery program I think I like better. And that was like Smart Recovery and Dharma Recovery. But saying to people who are struggling with a substance use disorder, saying that, AA is not the only way, or, are you curious about this? I'll help you with this. I think that's how we approach. Connection is the key. Don't let your loved ones isolate, because when they isolate, that's when they have a tendency to use drugs, because they are feeling so lonely, and they just need someone to reach out, and maybe even sharing their own story. Because I think addiction, when I reflect back on my recovery process, understanding my grandparents, my parents, my aunts and uncles, somewhere in your family, somewhere someone is struggling with something, right? Mm-hmm. And just asking the people who have gotten into recovery, as well as people who are still struggling, just questions of curiosity and wonder. I think the language of wonder is helpful, because it's not judgmental. Mm-hmm. And so I just wonder, what can I do, and just try to connect them to people who are trying their best to overcome this lifelong illness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of the things that is interesting is the task force was formed before COVID.
Yes.
And to your point, during COVID, there was a lot of bottled up energy for many of us. So how has that sort of been a challenge to overcome? Initially, I'm sure some of the street outreach and programming that you guys traditionally did were kind of stopped just because of the nature of us.
We kept working.
Yes.
We kept working.
Well, that's good.
Because all the people who are on the task force are people with lived experience, and they knew isolation is the downfall, and that's how people return back, if they're in recovery, back into substance use. So we didn't stop working, because we were working outside. So we masked up, we got on the street, we still taught Narcan, because we knew that if we weren't out there, then there would have been more deaths due to overdose. And so we knew that we could not stop working. And most recovery centers, I went to Above and Beyond, they didn't stop working, because they understood that it is the lack of connection that causes people to start using, and that our broken relationships with each other. And so we couldn't stop as a recovery community.
Yeah, and aside from, the COVID-19 pandemic being somewhat of a disruptor, but it sounds like you powered right through.
Yes.
What are some of the other challenges that you guys have overcome as a task force, or in your personal experience with really trying to stay positive, stay connected, and really continue this work?
Yeah, well, the stories. People come back to our table and they say, the Narcan you gave me saved a life. There was a couple that approached me who he handed Narcan out to in front of the Perry Hotel down on Wabash, and then we were someplace else. We were, I think, on Madison and Jackson, and they saw us and like, you gave us Narcan, and we saved a life, right? And so that's what gives us hope, is that all the stories that are told to us. Yesterday, one of my colleagues, she was coming to work, and someone had passed out due to overdose, and she revived them, right? And the guy woke up and looked at her and walked away, but she was just like, I saved a life. So that's what keeps us motivated to do the work, and we're getting health access to those who society doesn't feel, or society doesn't feel needs it, right? So that's another story of hope, right? Like, now that we have family guidance, now that we have UIC COPE, now that we have rush students, right? They come with us into places where most people are kind of afraid to go, right?
Yeah.
But these healthcare professionals are going there with us, and they are accompanying folks who use drugs, right? And so that's another thing that gives us hope, is that they're rushing in, and like we can't stop some of the volunteers. They come in and they so want to help, or also the healthcare providers that are with us out on the corner, right? They didn't know how to access the West Side, and the task force helped them to access the West Side into those harder places that were hard to go to.
That's really great.
Yeah.
I feel like it's goes back to the beginning of our conversation of partnership and really bridging the gaps that exist with even that access and entry point to those opportunities. So I'm wondering, you know, what else can we say about sort of this bridge and continuing to build it, and where are more resources, and what more can we do to help the West Side Task Force?
Well, just, you know, keep funding us, right? You know, the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, just keep funding us, which we have a strong supporter with Representative Ford. Also, too, when you see us out, engage us, learn Narcan, and we'll give you a Narcan to take with you. Everyone should have it. It should be one of the tools in your toolkit, you know, in your purse. I have one right now in my purse, you know. It's simple, easy to use, you know. And so learn it, and our hope, you know, in 5 years from now is that overdoses have been reduced. Like, we want to work ourselves out of the job. We don't want to continue to do this. We want to go on to the next public health issue that will always happen. There will always be something. But this is our work now. And we just encourage everyone to find us, find someplace. There's Narcan in public libraries. We're hopefully to get Narcan with the Chicago, with the CTA, with the Park District. It is encouraging those institutions to get Narcan too. That's one of the things that sometimes institutions are slow to adopt something new, but the librarians, they adopted it new quickly. And so just encouraging those institutions as well as schools. Schools are sort of been slow to be receptive to Narcan. The truth be told, people who use drugs, and that's almost all of us, right? I was to look at my mom's medical supply, she has a lot of stuff. She's 72 years old. And so even our older citizens, right, would need Narcan because opioids are everywhere. And so it's important for us to, like, keep it in the toolkit, keep it in the first aid kit, have Narcan so you can reverse overdoses.
That's really good advice. You know, as we continue to celebrate those in recovery and those that want to, we encourage you to look for the West Side Task Force and other community partners in this journey. I think that's all the time we have today. So thank you so much for the tremendous work you're doing in our communities. The focus on prevention and recovery is so critical as we continue to make our communities thrive. I want to thank CAN TV's nonprofit services for supporting today's program. My name is Meghan Philipp. Thank you so much. This has been Community Pulse, which airs on CAN TV Channel 21, also streaming on the app and through their other digital platforms. So you can check us out there. Thanks again.